Let me be brutally honest right out of the gate. You're not going to reinvent yourself at the last minute. You're not going to suddenly score 10 points higher because you found one secret trick in some Reddit thread at midnight. And that's fine because the goal in the final week before the LSAT is not a miracle. The goal is execution. And that's the part of LSAT prep that nobody glamorizes. The boring, unsexy stuff that actually protects your score. And in the final stretch, the biggest score drops don't come from not knowing enough, they come from unforced errors. Little mistakes that snowball to catastrophic consequences like tech problems, bad sleep, caffeine overload, timing chaos, or getting rattled by one weird section and never recovering. So today, I'm going to walk you through exactly how to handle the last minute prep window and test day itself, whether you're taking the LSAT remotely or in person, so that you show up sharp, calm, and ready to do what you already know how to do. I'm going to share with you the highest ROI LSAT test day advice that I could possibly give you. The first thing you should know is that your job right now is to protect points, not to chase points. This is not the week to level up. This is the week to stop bleeding points. Because if you've been studying seriously with practice tests, timed sections, review, fixing patterns, you've already built the ability. And now you've just got to make sure that nothing silly takes it away. Think of it like tapering off before a big race, before a marathon. You've already done the long runs. You don't get fitter the night before. You just show up less injured. So your mission now is simple. You want to keep your brain clear and your process stable. And the way you do that is by eliminating avoidable chaos, which brings us to the two testing formats, remote and in person. If you're taking the LSAT remotely, you're basically running a tiny prometric facility out of your home, which means you control everything, which could sound great until test day when you realize that you don't actually ever control everything. Because the remote LSAT is not taking a test at home, it is being supervised at home. And the fastest way to get rattled is to spend the first 15 minutes arguing with some remote proctor about something you didn't take seriously. And so let's make this easy for you. Your goal for your at home setup is to feel boring and predictable. Here's what I want you to do: set up your LSAT testing space in advance. Not the morning of, not just 1 hour before, but set it up a day or two before, ahead of time, and you run that system check. You pick the chair you're going to sit in. You pick the desk you're going to use. You figure out your lighting. And once it works, you freeze it. No experimenting on game day itself. You also want to update your computer's operating system early, not the morning of the LSAT. You don't update your browser right before check-in. You do it earlier so that you're not troubleshooting when your brain is already in fight or flight mode. You also want to keep your desk ridiculously clean because proctors reward your compliance. You don't want to give anyone a reason to pause you, question you, or slow you down. Now, there are a few big mistakes I see over and over. People forgetting the rules about what's allowed on the desk, people trying to use accessories they always use when studying but aren't actually allowed, and people treating it like it's some Zoom call. Test day is not a Zoom call. You're not walking around, you're not swiveling your laptop, you're there on camera steady the entire time. And here is the key principle: anything that causes the proctor to interact with you is a threat to your score. Not because it means you're getting in trouble, but because it stresses you out. It breaks your focus, it steals your time. So your setup should be so clean and compliant that checking in for the LSAT feels like brushing your teeth. It's automatic. Now, if you're taking the LSAT in person at a prometric testing center, here's what I want you to know. You're going to have fluorescent lights. It's going to feel like a corporate office. And you'll have other people taking other exams who could be breathing or sniffling like Darth Vader. You don't get to control much. But what you do get in exchange is a more standardized environment. So the trade-off is simple. When you take the LSAT remotely, you have more control, but there are also more ways it could potentially go wrong. If you take it in person, you have less control, but there are fewer potential tech surprises that you personally have to solve. If you take it at a testing center, know that check-in could take a while, so plan to wait around. If you arrive barely on time and there's a line, you might be panicking a little bit. So you want to arrive early. You want your day to start off feeling like you're early and you're good. You're also going to have strict rules about what enters the room. You can't bring your phone. You got to put away your stuff in a locker. You're not negotiating with them. You've got to be ready for the rules. You got to know them in advance. Now, you can't take a bathroom break whenever you want. This is not college. You can't raise your hand in the middle of a section. Breaks are structured. You do 2 timed sections back to back. You then have a 10-minute break. Then you have 2 more sections back to back, and that's the test. So don't overdo it on water or coffee. And if you're thinking this is all obvious, good, because you want things to be obvious. You want things to be straightforward. You also want to know the LSAT format. You've got 2 scored logical reasoning sections, 1 scored reading comp section, and 1 unscored extra sections of either logical reasoning or reading comp. You don't want to get disoriented by the format. There's no more logic games on the test. Reading comp could or might not include a dual or comparative passage, so don't be surprised by that. Know there will be an unscored extra section on the LSAT, and you won't know which one it is, and the sections could appear in any order. You don't want to be guessing which one's experimental during the test. You don't want to be doing math in your head. The rule is, on test day, you are in execution mode, not detective mode. You've got to know there are multiple sections, and one of them's unscored. And the unscored section will look exactly like a real section, and you won't know which one it is. So don't play that game of, was it weird? Maybe it doesn't count. That costs you energy. Treat every section like it counts, because if you take one off and it turns out to be real, you just lost points. Now let's talk about the final stretch, what to do and what not to do. You don't want to study too hard at the last minute. You don't want to burn out. You want to be recovering. You want to go in fresh, feeling cool, feeling confident, feeling ready to crush it. And so if you've been grinding for weeks or for months, your biggest risk now is mental fatigue, sloppy reading, feeling impatient, getting emotionally volatile, and the LSAT will punish you for all of that. You want to keep a narrow focus with targeted work, maybe one timed section or drilling a few questions in your weakest area, then you review deeply. Not just like I got it wrong and I'm moving on, but why was the right answer right? Why did the wrong answer tempt me? And what pattern do I keep repeating? That's where points come from. You don't want to do heroic marathons of 5-hour grind sessions. You don't want to do a practice test every single day. All of that is a recipe for burnout. You also don't want to engage in last-minute chaos feeling productive. So don't switch strategies in the final week. Don't try out some new timing method for the first time, and don't change your approach because you're scared. You don't want to engage in unproductive procrastination, pretending that you're preparing. Now, there is this likelihood a lot of students fall into of freaking out due to practice test results like it's some roller coaster where you take a timed exam and your score drops, and you invent some story around it like, I'm regressing, all my progress up to this point was fake, and I'm not ready, or that you should reschedule. One low score is just a single data point. And near test day, practice tests can get weird for totally normal reasons, like you're tired, or you're anxious, or you're feeling a little bit burned out. All of that is normal. You don't want to react emotionally to the pressure of the single practice test. So instead, you want to take your rolling average, not your best score, not your worst score, but your recent average, the most recent 5 practice tests that you took. That's the best indication of where you actually stand, what you are actually going to perform on test day most likely. And your practice test score is not a verdict on your intelligence. It's just feedback on your ability to execute under particular timed conditions. And people are constantly asking me, should I take one more full practice test right before the LSAT? And my answer would be, it depends on how you're feeling more than your skill level. If you're already feeling anxious, exhausted, unsure of your score, stressed out, it could be a bad idea. You don't want to spiral. And if it goes well, you might be raising your expectations and then spiral when the real test feels harder. It could backfire. But it could be okay if you're feeling pretty good, you're feeling calm, you want one more dry run, and you treat it like tuning up, not a judgment on your abilities. And if you do it, I want you to do it earlier rather than later, not at the last second. You also want to make it realistic, and you don't want to overanalyze the result. Now, you want to get your test day routine down as well. What separates high scorers from the rest is not that they feel calm, it's that they expect to feel nervous, and they don't interpret that as a problem. Nerves are not a sign that you're unprepared. They're a sign that your body knows that this matters, and that's okay. So we want a routine that turns your nerves into execution. Now, the night before the LSAT, you're not studying, it's just logistics and calming down. So you lay out everything: your government issued photo ID, what you're going to wear, anything allowed for whether you're taking it remotely or in person, your login info if you need it for Prometric, and a simple plan for your breakfast, your snacks, what you're going to do during the day of. You charge your devices, you set multiple alarms, and you don't just do a little studying, because a little studying could turn into spiraling, doom scrolling, doing LSAT questions in your bed at midnight. Instead, you want to do something that tells your body that you're safe, you're feeling good, you're feeling confident. You go for a walk, you take a shower, a hot bath, maybe watch Suits or Legally Blonde, read some fiction. Your goal is not to get smarter the night before. You just want to get steadier, more confident, feeling good. Now, the morning of, eat a real breakfast with some protein, nothing crazy, not just coffee alone, if you normally don't drink coffee, not 5 cups of coffee, and you hydrate like a normal person. You don't want to have to go to the bathroom midway through. And you want to dress feeling comfortable, sweats and hoodie, totally fine. You want to focus on arguments and feel comfortable going into that. Now, right before the test, some breathing exercises might be a good idea. There's this technique called box breathing, where you inhale for 4, you hold for 4, you exhale for 4, and you hold for 4. And you do that for 3 rounds. Then you loosen out your body, you shake out your hands, you roll your shoulders, you unclench your jaw. Because tension in your body becomes tension in your reading, and the LSAT is basically a reading test under pressure. Now let's talk worst case scenarios, because that's what everyone is secretly fearing. What if I freeze? What if I bomb? And you got to think through what bombing actually means. Most people imagine a dramatic drop in their score, but in reality, bombing usually means you score a few points below your average, or one section rattles you, or there's a timing mistake that you couldn't fully recover from. And that's not the end of your story, it's just a rough day. And the reason I'm saying this is important: when you accept that you can handle a rough moment, you stop panicking when a rough moment happens. Now, high scores aren't perfect, they're just good at recovery. They miss a question, they get annoyed, they feel a spike of fear, and then they move on. Because the LSAT punishes people who take the last question and they drag it into the next 5. So if something feels hard, here's the script. You say to yourself, okay, that was weird, but I'm going to keep moving. That's it. You don't need to emotionally solve it. You just got to keep executing. And remember, the LSAT is just a snapshot of one day, one set of questions, one set of conditions. It's not a verdict on your intelligence or your law school abilities, and you can always retake it. Law schools do not average multiple LSAT scores. They only take the highest score on record. Now, I want to land this with a few simple reminders that could save you real points on test day. First, don't change your strategy last minute. Don't chase confidence, chase execution, because confidence is going to come and go. Execution is a choice, and you have the ability to perform. Also, expect nerves. Nerves are not a problem. Everyone feels nervous, but the panic related to your nerves is the problem. So maintain your calm. And if you have one hard section, doesn't mean you're going to bomb it. The LSAT often feels harder on the official one, and that's normal. You also want to protect your brain power. So no guessing games. Don't try to figure out which one's the experimental section. Just read, choose an answer, and move on. And if you've been putting in real work, taking practice tests, reviewing, fixing patterns, then you've earned the right to trust yourself and your abilities. You don't need a miracle. You just need a clean test day with fewer unforced errors. You need a calm plan that you can follow even when your brain starts trying to scare you. That's what the final week is about. Proving and doing what you've already trained yourself to do, just one section at a time. Now, I see a ton of questions coming into the chat here. Thanks for all of these. I'll get to as many of them as I can. Anything at all, LSAT and law school admissions, happy to help. Of course, I've been talking about last-minute test day prep for those of you taking the LSAT in February, but we've also got April and June coming up, as well as August. By the way, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons to everybody watching this now or later. The link to book that free tutoring with me is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below this video on YouTube, in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and Instagram as well. Open offer to everybody watching this now or later. Happy to meet with you personally, privately, over Zoom video, one-on-one, to talk through your situation, help you craft a plan of attack. I look at your current LSAT score, if you've taken a practice test. If not, that's okay. We look at your goal LSAT score and your time frame, and we craft a plan to get you from here to there over that period of time. So I'm scanning through the chat here for all these questions. I see CJ says, I'm working a 9 to 5. Can I do an after 5 session? Yes, so I do have some time slots open after 5 p.m. Eastern time. If you click that link in my bio, you'll be able to get to my calendar and you'll see any of open availabilities. If you don't see a time that works for you, reach out and I'll do what I can. I see Naya's asking, I have my LSAT in April. Is there a test center in or near Toronto? Yeah, there should be. There should be test centers in and near pretty much every single major city in North America. You can check Prometric's website and there should be something there. Jordan Air says, my girl got a 165. Is that good to apply to law school? Could be. Depends on the law school. I mean, 165 is definitely an above average law school, but you got to look at the requirements for any given schools because they all have their own medians. If you are looking at law schools in the US, if you just Google the law school's name and the number 509, you'll be able to see the American Bar Association 509 reports, where you'll be able to see the LSAT median and the GPA median of last year's entering class, and that'll give you a sense of where anyone might be competitive. Other questions here. I see user 909 is asking, is the LSAT on a computer or in a testing center on paper? So the LSAT is now primarily administered on the computer, but you can take it either remotely on your own computer or in person on a computer at a Prometric testing center. You can also get special accommodations to take the LSAT on paper, but that is not the default. And so if you want to apply for the accommodations, you can, but do that far in advance because LSAC, the Law School Admission Council, is pretty strict about the deadlines. I see Joe saying they used to average multiple LSAT scores. So yeah, so that was a change that they discontinued. They made that change away from that in 2006. Prior to 2006, they would take the average of multiple LSAT scores. But starting in 2006, so for the past 20 years, they've been only considering the highest LSAT score on your record because the American Bar Association is only requiring law schools to report the highest LSAT score that you have on your score report. That's what they use for the US News Law School rankings. And so if you look at law schools' incentives, they have no incentive to care about the average anymore because the highest is the only one they have to report, which gives you more incentive to retake the LSAT because if you do better, that's great. If you don't, no big deal. And so for that reason, I recommend that everybody retake the LSAT at least once, meaning you take it officially at least twice because there's no downside really. If you do better, awesome. If not, no big deal. So imagine that, for example, your practice test average going into the LSAT was a 170 and you took it officially and you got a 170. You could say, great, I got what I deserved. I'm good. But the thing is that everyone's scores fluctuate. Even LSAC themselves, they give you a score band or a margin of error of 3.5 points on each end, meaning that if your true aptitude is a 170, maybe you take the LSAT, you get a 170. Another day you get a 166 or 167. Another day you get a 173 or a 174, and the LSAT's considered a valid and reliable test. But maybe you retake it and you get a 174. And of course, a 174 will get you much better outcomes than a 170 would. And if you scored worse, it wouldn't matter really. So for those of you who are applying to law school this fall, to start law school in fall 2027, you might want to do the April LSAT as your first attempt, do the June LSAT as your second attempt, or do June as your first and August as your second. But in either way, even if you retook it, you can still apply. The second applications open in September. Might not be a bad path forward for those of you who are planning ahead. I see Braden's asking, when do you think LSAC will begin moving away from remote testing? Who's to say, right? I mean, the LSAC is definitely aware of all the problems with the rise in LSAT cheating. For those who aren't aware, there's this cheating scandal phenomenon happening where in mainland China, a lot of companies have been facilitating cheating on the LSAT. And any online system, of course, is vulnerable to being hacked, vulnerable to cheating, given that the incentive is there. Folks are taking advantage of that. And I think the only way to eliminate cheating or at least reduce it significantly would be discontinuing remote testing, online testing, and going back to in-person testing, because if they were to administer it only in person at testing centers, they would have more control over the administrations and they would lock down all the cheating that's going on. I think they have to go back to in person, but whether they will and when they will is really an open question. I would be surprised if they didn't do it in the next couple of years, but bureaucracies move slowly, and there are, of course, issues of access with regard to only offering it in person. But prior to the pandemic, it was only in person, so I don't see why they couldn't go back to that again. And it's unfortunate if folks have to travel far for a remote LSAT, but I think that the cheating really calls into question the integrity of the LSAT, and it's unacceptable that some folks are getting an unfair advantage on the test due to the cheating. So I think they should go back to in-person only. I think they really have to, but whether they will is up to them, and it's anyone's guess. Jonathan's asking, thoughts on applying to law school, expressing my interest for public interest law. Well, we certainly need more folks practicing law in the public interest, so kudos to you for wanting to pursue that. In terms of expressing that on your applications, yeah, do it. But it'll be a lot more believable. Law schools will take it more seriously if you have something in your background supporting the idea that you are going to law school for that purpose. And so if you have any work experience or volunteer experience that supports that idea that you've done public interest or volunteer work in the past, that'll make it more likely they will take that seriously. But law schools ultimately are focused primarily on your LSAT score and your GPA when deciding whether to admit you. And so get those numbers up. Don't over-index on your story as reason for them to take you. Scanning through for other questions coming in here. Thanks for all these great questions. I'm just scanning through the chat here. I see a lot that came in the past few minutes. Tom's asking, is argumentative writing administered separately from the logical reasoning and reading comp? Yeah, so it's a separate administration. It's a separate proctoring system. It's not proctored live. They just record you, and then AI could potentially flag the recording if there's any security issue, but you're taking it in a separate sitting, typically on a separate day. And I wouldn't recommend taking it on the same day as your official LSAT because there's no need to, and you don't want to take on too much at once, right? So you could take the writing sample up to 8 days prior to your official LSAT, and you could even take it after your official LSAT. Know that they will not release your score to you, or law schools actually, until you have done the writing sample. But what I would recommend for most folks is focus on the scored part of the LSAT first and foremost, since that's the most important part. Take a day or two off after your official LSAT multiple choice portion, and then do the writing. And it's not scored for now, so no reason to worry too much about it. I would say focus on the multiple choice for now. Nick is asking, what are the most common flaws on the LSAT? So, I mean, there are a limited set of maybe a dozen or two classic logical fallacies that you want to get familiar with, like confusing correlation and causation, confusing necessary and sufficient conditions, ad hominem personal attacks, false dilemmas. I have videos on this on the YouTube channel. If you just click the link in my bio, you'll be able to access those videos covering flaw questions. Well worth getting familiar with the classic fallacies. And then there are some that are just kind of idiosyncratic or unique to the argument. And the more that you do practice questions and drill them, the more you'll become familiar with them. And I recommend doing that, of course, because the LSAT is ultimately a test of pattern recognition. If you can spot the tricks and traps on the LSAT, you can avoid them. It all comes down to understanding how the test makers think and seeing it from their perspective. And once you can do that, everything is going to change for you. And you'll be able to solve questions faster because it comes down to muscle memory. You get faster at solving LSAT questions by getting faster at interpreting the arguments and the passages on the LSAT, and they keep using the same structures, the same skeletons over and over again. And so if you can recognize the pattern in the reasoning more quickly, you will be able to better spot the gap in the argument or the author's opinion in reading comp, and you'll be able to look past the surface level topic of the passage. But you don't want to be interpreting the argument for the first time on test day. I think that's the major problem a lot of students fall into, is that they're not familiar enough with the patterns or the methods of reasoning, and then they're reinventing the wheel under timed conditions, and there's really no reason to do that because they keep using the same arguments over and over again. They're kind of lazy in that way, where they keep using the same core logic and just changing the surface level topics. You could have one argument on dinosaur extinction, another argument on climate change or car accidents, different surface level topic or theme, but underlying that, the same method of reasoning. So the more you familiarize yourself, the faster you'll get, and your accuracy will go up because you can get to more questions more quickly. Tom Wilson's asking for remote proctoring of the LSAT. Could you just take it in a Starbucks? Regardless of optimal, is it permitted? I don't think that's going to work to take it in any public place because you can't really control the environment and there's going to be too much background noise. They don't want to see any other people in the background. And in Starbucks, there's music playing. Somebody could walk up behind you, they could interrupt you. For an exam as important as the LSAT, definitely don't do that. Find some secure environment, your bedroom. If you don't have your own bedroom, someone else's bedroom. Rent a quiet office space for an hour. There are like hourly office spaces in a lot of major cities that you might be able to use, or even book a conference room in a library potentially if you can for a couple of hours. Ask a friend to use their office space, but you can't do it publicly. I wouldn't recommend that. It's virtually certain to get flagged as a security issue, and that would invalidate your exam. I would not recommend that. And you do need a microphone as well. You got to be able to speak as well. That's a tech requirement as well, I'm pretty sure. BBL, Jerry's asking about, does the LSAT app actually help those who don't know anything about the LSAT? So the LSAC, the Law School Admission Council, has their Law Hub platform. They do have some lessons on there. I don't think the lessons are very good, to be frank, but there's something. You do also get 4 practice tests available for free on Law Hub. Then you get all the other exams, there are 59 of them in total. With your Law Hub Advantage subscription for $120, you get a full year of access, well worth the investment. The problem, though, is that they don't include any explanations for the vast majority of those exams, and so you need to go outside sources for that. In my courses and in my coaching program, we do have comprehensive explanations for the different sections, the different question types, but the best breakthroughs, the biggest score increases come from getting more personalized support, because when you're studying on your own, you don't know what you don't know. And so getting some expert guidance from someone who's been there, gone through that process themselves, it's going to make your path forward that much smoother, which is why I'm offering free LSAT tutoring for everybody watching this now or later. If you haven't already, you can book that free one-on-one LSAT tutoring lesson with me. The link to book that is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below this video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and IG as well. Open offer for everyone. I see BBLs asking how you join the course. There's a link for our small group program in my bio, but if you want something more personalized, we always like to customize that for the individual students. So book a call with me and we can talk through it more. I see Dash is asking, how long do you recommend that someone study for the LSAT? I recommend a minimum of 2 to 3 months of LSAT prep, but ideally 5 to 6 months to reach your fullest potential on the LSAT. You can do it in less time, but the highest scores typically require putting in a bit more time, putting in a bit more work. If you don't have as much time, of course, that's okay. But if you're up against the clock, if you're at the tail end of this cycle and you just got to get your apps in, of course, you do what you can. If you're taking it in April, by the way, in 10 weeks, we do have a more intensive boot camp style approach to get you the maximum score increase in a shorter period of time. What we do for the boot camp is we take our standard 4 to 6 month curriculum and we compress and accelerate it into only 2 to 3 months with live coaching 7 days a week. We recommend a minimum of 10, 15 hours a week for that program, ideally closer to 20 if you can, but we always personalize the program for the individual student. If you're taking it in June, of course, with 4 months and change, you could take a more slow and steady approach. Stacy's asking, do you recommend taking a practice test first before tutoring as a beginner? I do recommend taking a practice test at the start of your prep just to get a baseline. Don't over-index on it. It's not an indication of your potential. It just tells you what you already know, which is that you have not yet learned the language of the LSAT, but of course you can over time. We can guide you on how best to take that practice test under realistic conditions. You want to take it under strict timing in the actual test day format, and so we could talk through what that format looks like. You want to get an accurate read on where you're at, so not taking lots of breaks with the proper time constraint to better replicate what test day is going to be like. Rafaz asking, how competitive do you think next cycle will be compared to this cycle? So it really depends on how many people apply, right? I mean, application numbers are up big time over the past couple of years. They're up 50% over the past 2 years. And of course, law schools have not increased their class sizes by 50%. So you have more people applying for fewer seats. Whether that will continue depends on how the economy is doing. And there's this sort of employment stagnation right now. So when it's harder to get jobs, more people go to law school to wait out the bad economy. And with AI disrupting things, it's harder to get entry level jobs with just a BA. So I think that's only going to continue. More people will look to go to grad school and law school, wait things out. Hopefully things will get better. And of course, with more specialization, you become more employable, you increase your earning potential, and then you come out in a better position on the other end. Of course, at least that's the hope. But you also want to minimize the debt that you're taking on and go to better ranked schools. And so the way that you do that is by getting a higher LSAT score. A higher LSAT score gets you into better law schools, more prestigious schools, and also gets you more scholarship money. And in many cases, it's better to go to a lower ranked school with more scholarship money than a higher ranked school with less scholarship money, because the cost of law school is only going up. The average cost of attendance is $84,000 per year. But due to the elimination of the Grad Plus loans, there's a cap on how much you can borrow. It's capped at $50,000 per year. And so you have this gap of roughly $34,000 going beyond what you can borrow. And of course, you might not be able to pay out of pocket for that from your savings. And so if you can get discounts on your tuition, you can reduce or eliminate that gap entirely. And so the more you can do that, the better. And the higher your LSAT and GPA are above the median of the schools to which you're applying, the more you can reduce that gap, the more scholarships you can get. Phaedra's asking, why won't schools' tuitions go down with the gap? Because there's a lot of administrative bloat, to be frank. Law schools have significant overhead, not just professors, but also their facilities, for example, the bureaucracies. There's been a lot of growth in the administration of these law schools. And so for that reason, they can't reduce their costs without cutting jobs. And there's this law of bureaucracy where things only grow over time. And so no one wants their job to be the one that's cut. And so for that reason, they're in a kind of a tight spot. To some extent, of course, they will have to downsize. If there's this demographic cliff coming up, of course, fewer people applying in a couple of years, which means they will have no choice but to do so, at least for the law schools that are tuition dependent. And so we'll see what happens in a few years. But for now, they don't want to reduce tuition, at least. They have their costs they have to pay. Maybe they will to some extent, remains to be seen. But for now, of course, the way that you can reduce your tuition that you pay is by getting more scholarship money. I see that BBL just booked the call with me. Awesome. I'm excited to meet with you. And again, for anyone, you can just book the free tutoring with me. The link is in my bio, unpluggedprep.com/start. Happy to talk you through your situation, help you craft your plan of attack. Simi's asking, do you pay that $34,000 while in school, or can you wait until you graduate? Law school is the sort of thing where the schools want their tuition money now. They're not going to let you defer the tuition payment until after you graduate. And so what most people do is they take out loans and they pay them off after the fact. But you don't want to go into severe debt for law school. It can be kind of depressing and kind of stressful to have that hanging over you. Some folks pay off their tuition debt over the course of several decades. I don't want that to be your situation. Some folks have no choice but to do that, of course, but the more that you can reduce your tuition that you pay through getting merit scholarships, the lower your debt's going to be. And there are many folks who get full rides to law school, meaning they don't pay anything. You can even get a stipend on top of tuition, which means that they pay you to go to law school, meaning that you're getting your living expenses covered to some extent. That's the ideal position to be in. And the best way to do that is by applying with stronger numbers, making yourself a more desirable candidate, putting yourself in a better negotiating position. And your GPA, of course, is probably pretty fixed at this stage. You're probably finished with undergrad or finishing up soon if you're studying for the LSAT. So limited ability to improve your GPA. But your LSAT score is a single day, 2.5 hours, and you can retake it and get a higher score. That's really the optimal way for many folks. Great questions. Thanks for these. Yeah, in terms of argumentative writing, the argumentative writing opens up 8 days prior to the official LSAT administration. And so if you want to do that now, you could. I see that Sarah's saying argumentative writing for February LSAT takers is opening up today. And so you may be able to do that already in your lsac.org account. You don't have to do it now. Of course, you could take it after the fact as well. Simi's asking, have you seen any applicants with a 3.2 GPA and a high LSAT get merit scholarships? Yeah, definitely possible. We do see that happen. It's all relative to the medians of the schools to which you're applying. And so with a 3.2 GPA, you're probably below most law schools' LSAT, GPA medians, but with a high LSAT, you could be above their LSAT medians. Of course, high is relative, so we have to talk specifics here. If you're looking at the top 14 law schools, for example, their GPA medians are around a 3.9, so a 3.2 GPA puts you below that. Their LSAT medians are 170 to 174, and so if your LSAT is 175, you could be above their LSAT medians, of course. And then it's a question of how much they're weighing your LSAT versus your GPA. The good news is that most law schools, nearly every single one, weighs your LSAT score more heavily than your undergraduate GPA. So you've still got plenty of time to improve your position. So BBLs, I'm saying, Jerry, yes, the LSAT is more important than your undergraduate GPA. They weigh the LSAT score more heavily for almost every single law school. So you could potentially get merit scholarships if your LSAT score is sufficiently high enough. I see exclamation point question mark is asking, what should I be doing as a college junior planning on going to law school? So for anyone who's still an undergrad, you want to make sure that you maintain a high GPA, ideally have an upward trajectory. If your GPA has been low, aim to raise it. If you're a junior in college, you could start studying for the LSAT now. Let's say you're entering your spring semester of junior year. You could start studying now, study more hardcore over the summer, take it in August, and then apply the second the applications open in September. So maybe you take a relatively lighter course load spring semester, block off your summer primarily to focus on the LSAT and take it in August. Could be a good move. That might be the way to go. If you're a freshman, I saw somebody earlier who was a freshman in college. I don't think that you need to study for the LSAT as a freshman in college. I think for now, just enjoy college, get a good GPA, make sure that law school is truly what you want to do, explore the law a bit. And then when you're a sophomore or junior, then you could start studying for the LSAT. That would be sufficient time. You don't need more than a year to study for the LSAT. In fact, 6 months could be more than enough as well. Scanning through for more questions here. Thanks for all of these. Stacy's asking, how do they evaluate GPA for someone who has a master's and attempted other programs outside of law? So for law school admissions, they only consider your undergraduate GPA. Master's GPA is not factored into their calculations. There is this thing called a law school admissions index. It is a formula where law schools weigh your LSAT score relative to your GPA, and they spit out your chances essentially. And of course, they can look at your application essays. They look at the soft factors like your resume, your letters of rec, your personal statement, but those are not quantifiable. They are qualitative, and they focus more on the quantifiable metrics, the data, unlike undergrad admissions, because law schools are much more driven by the US News rankings, which only look at numbers, of course. So they will see your undergraduate GPA and calculate that. They will see your LSAT score and calculate that heavily. But master's GPA, they look at it for context, but it's not factored in part because not everybody went to graduate school. And presumably, of course, your master's is in an area of total specialization that you are likely to excel in. But undergrad, there are more requirements that you may not have wanted, of course. Yossi's asking, would you recommend taking the February LSAT with the low 150s and just applying or applying next cycle? So to be frank, I would not recommend taking the LSAT if your practice test scores are in the low 150s. And I wouldn't recommend applying to law school with a score in the low 150s because, to be frank, there aren't any law schools worth going to that will accept you with an LSAT in the low 150s. The better ranked schools just won't accept you. The lower ranked schools won't give you any scholarship money, and you'll be paying sticker price, full tuition, taking on that debt. And the lower ranked schools typically do not have good employment outcomes. They don't have good bar passage rates. It's not a good return on your investment. So I'd recommend instead retaking the LSAT, studying more, taking it in April or June instead, giving yourself more time, and applying early next cycle instead, ideally with a score at least in the 160s. As Diet Coke is saying, 150 LSAT score is going to lead you to predatory law schools not worth attending. I totally agree on that. Kaylee's asking, if I take the test in my sophomore year, can I use that when I'm ready to apply? How long before your score expires? So your LSAT score is good for 5 years. If you take it as a sophomore, you will still be able to apply in your senior year and go directly from law school, from undergrad into law school, and you could even take a gap year if you wanted to. But if you're a sophomore now, I'd say give yourself some time, maybe take it as a junior instead, so that you have more of a window where your score is applicable, and you've taken more time to maintain a high GPA in undergrad and evaluate whether law school is truly what you want to do. I see Stacy's asking, how many schools do you recommend applying to? I recommend applying to at least a dozen schools. And the reason is you want to apply to a couple of safeties, a couple of targets, and a couple of reaches. The more that you apply, you're going to have more scholarship negotiation leverage when you apply to a larger range of schools and you get more offers. If you only apply to a couple or only one, then you have very little to no scholarship negotiation leverage, and you won't be able to play the schools off each other. If you have more offers, you can go to school A, which offers you nothing, and say, I'd love to choose your school, but school B offered me X scholarship. Can you match or exceed that? And I'll choose your school instead, because finances are real. And you can, of course, sub in the particulars, but that's the general theme I would recommend using. Scanning through for more questions here. Thanks for all of these. BBL Jerry's asking, do you work with payment plans? Yeah, so we do offer financing for our programs. If you wanted to do financing through third-party options like Affirm or Klarna or Afterpay, we know that not everybody can prepay for the coaching program, so we try to make it flexible, and we always customize things for the individual student. So we're happy to talk through more of that on a call. And by the way, folks, if you haven't already, just for those joining now, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons, private one-on-one sessions with me personally for everybody watching this live now or later on video. The link to book that free tutoring with me is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below this video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and IG as well. Open offer for everybody watching this now or later. And if you find these lives helpful, I do these every single weekday, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific, here on YouTube, TikTok, IG, wherever you're watching this. If you find this helpful, please spread the word, share this to your socials, share this in your Discord channels or group chats, Facebook, wherever you're with others studying for the LSAT. The only way this grows is through word of mouth. I don't do any advertising for these, and the algorithm doesn't really boost them because they can't run ads during a live, and so I really do rely on your spreading the word, and I appreciate your support for this. I see Yossi's asking, do you recommend always aiming for scholarships or ranking when accepting a school? It depends, right? So for some folks, they're going to want to choose a more prestigious law school with less scholarship money. If you want to go into big law, if you want to be a clerk on the Supreme Court or a federal court, for example, then prestige matters a lot. You want to go to Harvard or Yale or Stanford or Chicago, for example. If you want to work in academia, maybe a more prestigious school is more important. If you look at the current Supreme Court justices or politicians, for example, a lot of them went to more prestigious schools, and maybe that's going to help with the pipeline and networking, for example. For other folks, if you want to work at a more regional, smaller law firm, if you want to open your own practice, if you want to work at a family-owned firm, for example, then maybe it makes sense to go to a lower-ranked school with more scholarship money, and it doesn't really matter where you go. So the answer is it depends. Consider your goals when making that decision. But I think for a lot of folks, they're over-indexing on ranking and not enough on saving money on scholarships, and law school debt's real. So you might want to take that question pretty seriously and actually do some financial modeling or predictions of what will the actual debt payments be on your loans over time, and go for the schools that give you more scholarships. But do the math is what I'm saying. It's a big investment here. You're spending 6 figures in tuition. I see Miguel's asking, my friend just tanked her LSAT. How do I inspire her? she wants to be in prestigious, like I'm saying, she wants to get a higher score, wants to go to a more prestigious school maybe. I mean, I'm sorry to hear about what happened for your friend. I mean, a lot of folks got their scores back and didn't do well, and students often actually drop at least 5 to 8 points from their practice tests to the actual exam. So you want to have that buffer. If you're aiming for a 170, you want to go into your official exam having a 175 or higher in case you have a bad proctor, a tech issue, nerves and anxiety, or maybe your friend didn't properly simulate test day conditions, considering the pacing, the time management, the endurance. Actual LSAT test day is you're doing 2 timed sections back to back. You're taking a 10-minute break. You're then doing 2 more timed sections back to back, and that's the test. And each section is only 35 minutes. So if you're taking breaks, if you're pausing the clock, checking your phone, getting a snack, your score is going to get inflated. If you're doing 4 separate timed sections on 4 consecutive days and adding them together, that does not make a full exam, right? Because endurance is real. And so I'm just spitballing here at all different factors in terms of why your friend's score might have dropped. And it could just be we got to better simulate test day on the practice test, or we just got to raise the baseline. Or maybe there's a type of resource or type of support that your friend did not take advantage of that they could take advantage of on a retake. So a lot of folks just self-study using Khan Academy or the practice test or YouTube, but they're not getting any personal feedback on what they're getting wrong and why. And so if there's a course or coaching that your friend could take advantage of that might help them get a higher score, this might be the time to seek it out. And if your friend wants to book the free call with me, you could send her the link. Again, that's an open offer for everybody. The link's in my bio. Happy to help out and talk through the particulars more. I see user 0845 is saying, my GPA is a 3.1, but I scored a 168 on the LSAT. Do I have a shot at a T14? So we got to look at the numbers and the requirements, right? So the top 14 law schools, their GPA medians are all roughly around a 3.9. Their LSAT medians are low 170s. So you're below on both the GPA and on the LSAT. So I'd say odds are unlikely, unfortunately. You might want to retake the LSAT. If you can get a 175, then at least you'll be a splitter. Your GPA is still going to be below the medians, but your LSAT will be higher, and then you'll have a better shot. Of course, I'm never going to say don't shoot your shot. You could blanket the T14 and see what happens. If you have incredible softs, incredible work experience, there are folks who get in and outperform the numbers, but typically, unfortunately, that's unusual. It's not likely to be the case, and you can look up on law school data, for example. It's a website where people put in their stats. You'll be able to see where you might be competitive, might not be T14. I'd recommend retaking just for better odds. See a question here. Any weight on what my major is? I'm poli-sci minor and may do finance or marketing. Finance is more difficult, so it risks harming my GPA. Does that give me any advantage versus an easier major like marketing? Yeah, so the truth is that taking a harder major can tank your GPA and hurt your law school admissions chances. I think it's unfortunate because obviously a challenging major is going to harm your GPA because it's more strictly curved. Other folks with easier majors get the benefit of grade inflation and they do better in admissions. And I don't think that's right that all majors are weighted equally when it comes to admissions, but numbers are numbers. And so applying with a lower GPA from a harder major will harm your law school admissions chances. If you were purely interested in getting into the best law school, getting the most scholarship money, and you were solely focused on law school in particular, then I'd say go for the easier major where you're going to have a higher GPA. I wish that were not the case, but that's just the reality of law school admissions. I personally was a poli-sci major as well. That helped my GPA, but there was this one class I took. I took a beginner level econ class, not my thing. It was a severely curved class, tanked my GPA because I was competing in part against folks who had done that same econ in high school, and they were just redoing it for an easy A. So the competition can harm your GPA, then your GPA is lowered and that harms you. So law schools don't weight your major. Your GPA is your GPA regardless of what you studied. And so a higher GPA will only help you. So if law school is your sole focus, go for the marketing major. If you're not sure whether law school is what you want to pursue though, and you might want to consider just going straight into finance after graduating from undergrad, then maybe major in finance instead. I see, Kate, you just signed up for the call with me. Awesome. Excited to meet with you. Happy to help out. And so what we do during these calls, folks, is we look at where you're currently scoring on the LSAT, if you've taken a practice test already. If not, that's okay too. We look at your goal LSAT score, then we look at your time frame, whether you're taking it in April or June or August or beyond. We map out what it's going to take for you to get from here to there over that time frame, given what you can put into your LSAT prep. Of course, I can't do a lot for you in the home stretch before the February LSAT, only 1 week. I don't like to promise overnight success, but April, we've got 10 weeks. June, we've got 4 months. August, we've got more like 6 months, plenty of time to improve significantly. And the good news is for anyone taking it in April or June or August, you can take any one of those LSAT test dates and apply the second that applications open in the fall. I think it's great if you're planning ahead. Of course, February is the last LSAT that I would take for those applying to law school at the tail end of this cycle. April's a bit late. Some schools won't take April LSAT results. Some will. But if you wanted to retake it in April for scholarship negotiation or reconsideration, might not be a bad idea. I think more folks should do that, actually. Not enough folks are aware that April can help you for the tail end of this cycle, but for the best odds of admission and for the most scholarship money, better to apply earlier than later if you can. Just scanning through for more questions here. Thanks for all of these. Just keep them coming. I see Chukri's asking, if I have a 3.5 GPA because I was working during school, does that hurt me in getting into a good law school? To be frank, yeah, it will hurt a little bit compared to somebody who wasn't working during school and had a higher GPA, but it is what it is. And of course, you can write an addendum to give some additional context for why your GPA was lower than it otherwise would have been. Law schools will appreciate that, but 3.5 GPA will hurt the school when it comes to the rankings. And so that will hurt you as an applicant, unfortunately, just is what it is. But the good news is that your LSAT score weighs more heavily than your undergrad GPA for nearly every single law school. And so I would focus on that at this point now. GPA is what it is. Can't change that. You're not going to redo all of undergrad most likely, but you can take or retake the LSAT. And that's going to be the best way for you to improve your odds of admission at this stage. I see Nick is asking, what LSAT practice test should I take to gauge where I should start studying or what I should focus on? So there are 59 released LSAT practice tests on LawHub. They're numbered 101 to 159. The more recently numbered exams are more recent, and the LSAT's evolved over time. And so if you want to get the most accurate gauge of where you're at, I would suggest doing a relatively newer exam. Anything in the 140s or 150s is totally fine. Just take one of those as a benchmark to see where you stand, but don't over-index on it. I mean, for most folks, when they take a cold diagnostic, it typically doesn't go well, unfortunately, because the LSAT is kind of like a foreign language. And so when you take that practice test, it just tells you what you already know, which is that you haven't yet learned the language of the LSAT, but of course, you can over time. And when we talk about how to study for the LSAT, I divide prep into 3 major phases: accuracy, pacing, and endurance. Accuracy is building a strong foundation in the different sections and the different question types, then drilling questions by type to better understand the proper perspective from which to view each section and each question type. Then pacing is doing individual timed sections to work on how you allocate your time over the course of the section, your time management. And then endurance is doing full-length timed practice tests to build up your endurance so that you're not fatigued by section 4, and that ideally test day itself will be like just another practice test. You've done it all before. It's just rinse and repeat. We typically recommend doing at least 10, 12 practice tests before the big day, so it becomes a smoother process. You have your internal timing, your internal pacing already. And so you want to allow sufficient time for that. If you're taking it in June, for example, you could devote 1 month to accuracy, 1 month to pacing with individual sections, 2 months to full exams. You don't have to do all 59 numbered exams, though. Even just doing the most recent 10 or 15 would be sufficient. And of course, you want to review them deeply. I have this framework for review called the Socratic review method. It's basically root cause analysis. So we look at what you're getting wrong, why you're getting it wrong, then we extract the key insights from the mistakes that you're making, in your process so that you can avoid making the same mistake again. And so, of course, you could do all of this just in your own self-studying, but if you want guidance, if you want the support getting you there, I offer free LSAT tutoring for everybody watching this now or later. Of course, the link's in my bio. We also offer more comprehensive private coaching programs as well, one-on-one coaching, small group sessions, on-demand courses, custom study plans. If you want to talk through what that could look like, I see Alyssa's asking about it. You could book the free tutoring lesson with me on video, one-on-one over Zoom, and we could talk through it more. Happy to help. We always try to customize the program to your needs and also make it meet your budget as well. And we have financing available as well, like somebody was asking about. I see Alyssa's asking, is it fair to say that logical reasoning is word puzzles? Yeah, you could view it that way. I mean, it's really more like your ability to analyze and critique arguments, right? So there are tons of terrible arguments in the logical reasoning section, and the more that you can spot the flaw or the gap in the argument, why it's wrong, the better able you'll be to solve the questions. It's pattern recognition. They use the same limited set of flawed arguments over and over and over, and they just disguise them with different window dressing. And so you got to strip away the surface level masking that is the topic and get down to the core logic of the question. Once you do that, the LSAT becomes a whole lot easier. And so we aim to give you the exposure to the tricks and traps of the test so that you can avoid making those same mistakes next time around. I see Catherine's asking, I'm taking the LSAT in February. What do you recommend I do in the final week leading up to the test? So I would recommend maybe 1 or 2 timed exams over the next week, review them in depth. That could be all that you do. If you want to drill some weak areas on the side, a particular type of logical reasoning question or reading comp, you could certainly do that, but don't stress, don't overdo it. You don't want to burn yourself out. Definitely don't take a timed exam every single day. That is a recipe for burnout. Better to do fewer exams and review them in more depth. If you want to review foundational materials on a weak area, you could, of course, do that, but this is not the time to experiment or try out anything new. You want to be tapering off so that you go into the test itself feeling fresh. And of course, you want to properly simulate test day conditions during these practice tests, get familiar with the pacing of the exam. Again, it's 2 timed sections back to back, 1 10-minute break, 2 more sections back to back, and that's the test. That is it. And if you want to talk through particulars, of course, if there's a particular area that you're struggling with, of course, you could book the call with me. We could talk through it more. So Yossi's asking, when doing reading comp, should you mainly focus on doing 3 passages rather than saving time for the 4th? The problem with this approach is that you set a cap on or a ceiling on how high you can score when you leave out one entire passage. For anyone aiming for a 165 LSAT score or higher, you've got to attempt every single question on the LSAT. Now, if you're struggling to go from a 130 to a 150 or 155, then maybe I could see in some limited cases that sort of approach where you do fewer questions with higher accuracy. But again, if you're ever randomly guessing on a set of questions like the 7 or so in one passage, you're guaranteed to get roughly 4 of them wrong just by simple math when you randomly guess on a multiple choice exam, right? So I don't love that approach. It could make sense for some folks, but not for most folks who are aiming for 165 plus. I'd want to see what can we do to speed you up on the reading comp overall. How are you allocating your time? In reading comp, I typically recommend max 3, maybe 3.5 minutes on the passage, initial read, to have sufficient time for the questions associated, because you've got roughly 7 questions per passage. And already spending 3 minutes on your read gives you less than a minute per question. And it takes time to evaluate all 5 choices and the question, right? So I recommend less note-taking, less highlighting, absorb the main idea, primary purpose, author's opinion, lock that down, go into the questions, come back to the passage when you need to solve particular questions. And of course, if you want to talk through reading comp or logical reasoning, happy to talk through it on the private one-on-one tutoring lesson that I'm offering everybody for free. And of course, I have plenty of YouTube videos about these topics as well, linked in my bio on TikTok and IG. I'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific. Yeah, I'll see you all then. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care. Thanks for joining.